All right, we are live. My name is Johnny Vasquez, and I am the Chief Sweater Knitter at 30 Day Sweater. Today, I'm going to teach you how to measure yourself for your next sweater project. And we all know that getting the perfect fit is almost impossible when it comes to knitting a sweater. And there's a lot of factors to that, but one of those is having good measurements of yourself or the person that you're knitting. Now, I'm going to give you a few tips before I dive into what specifically you want to be measuring. But I want to let you know that I've written all of this stuff down in a easy worksheet where you can keep track of everything, and it gives you a diagram of everything that you, it's actually a better diagram than the one I drew here, of everything that you will want to measure, and then it's got a place for you to write down all of that information so that you can use those measurements when you're working on your next sweater project. So if you want to get that download, just go to 30daysweater.com. 30daysweater.com/measure. Okay, just enter your email address in there, and I will send you that worksheet for you to be able to use later. So a couple of tips before I dive into this. One, you're going to want to wear whatever you would normally wear under a sweater. So if you would wear a shirt like I've got on here underneath, like I'm wearing under my sweater. I actually have two shirts on because I've got an undershirt on as well. So I would want to have that same kind of undergarments or whatever I plan on wearing under the sweater when I'm doing the measuring. Okay. The other thing is, if you're worried about things like ease, which is how much extra fabric there is, breathing room within the sweater, then I would actually measure a sweater that you like the way it fits rather than doing your body. So you can do all of these same measurements on the sweater, and I think you'll get a little bit better measurements. They won't be quite as custom fit, but here you're going to have to adapt it slightly to make sure that you're accounting for, the whole of the sleeve, and things like how much extra circumference you want in the sweater so that you can get like a more fitted sweater versus a more loose boyfriend style sweater. And then the last tip is, this is always going to be easier to do with a friend. So you might want to ask one of your kids or your spouse or just another knitting friend to help you in this process, so that way that they can kind of make sure that your measuring tape is always level to the floor, and that you're getting the right things. And for some of these things, you're going to have to work with someone else, just because logistically it'll be a little bit challenging. So let's dive into the different things that you'll want to be measuring. And the first and most obvious is going to be the chest here. So the chest is going to, or the bust, and this is really the most key measurement for any sweater. You're going to want it to be at the widest part of the bust, and make sure that you have your hands down when you are doing the measurement, because your chest actually expands a bit when you lift your hands up. So keep your arms down when you're getting this measurement so that you get the most accurate. The other thing I'd recommend you do is take a deep breath and then just sort of relax. And at that point, you're going to have probably the best, most accurate measurement with your chest sort of just slightly expanded after breathing. The second measurement that you're going to want to get is on the back of your sweater, and that's going to be from right at the base of the neck all the way to where you want the hem of the sweater to lie. And so again, this is where it's helpful to have a reference sweater to know, like, okay, this is where I like my sweaters to sort of hang. That one's pretty easy. You're going to want to measure your neck. Now, you can measure the neck right here. Or if you're doing something that's a little bit more custom, you can measure the neckline. And so you would want to sort of like measure around the collarbone at that point. And it really just depends on what your pattern is looking for. When you're using the 30-day sweater framework, we base your sweater neck size around where you want the neck to be versus the actual neck measurement. Now, if you want just a quick cheat, you can measure your neck, and then I would then multiply that by, I'm sorry, not your neck. Take your chest measurement and multiply that by 30%. So 30% of your chest, and you should get a pretty decent sized hole for your head to go through. All right. Other things that we're going to want to measure. You're going to want to measure the underarm. Okay. So that's from where your sleeve would connect to the body of the sweater and all the way to the wrist. Okay? And speaking of wrist, you're also going to want to measure your wrist. Okay? So this is also, these numbers don't correlate to the worksheet. I'm just going sort of in a random order here. But the worksheet has, there's no specific order to measure things in. But I don't want angry emails from people being like, these don't match up. I know they don't match up. Okay, so you also want to measure your wrist, and I would measure your wrist a little bit more on the loose side. So if you can fit a finger underneath there, that's just going to make sure that you've got a nice fit. You can always add a little bit more inches to any of these measurements. So if you want to add ease to the sweater, then you're going to want to add an inch or two, maybe even 3 or 4, depending on how loose you want the sweater. Here I'd recommend adding about an inch or an inch and a half around the wrist of the collar, because as you can see, your sweater is not always going to be tight up against your wrist, and I think there's a lot of people that don't actually like that feeling of it being real tight. So the reason why we measured the underarm of the sweater versus the top of the sweater is because we want to get a measurement of the arm that comes from the middle of the neck all the way over the shoulder and over the elbow. Okay, and ideally you're going to bend the elbow into your front here and measure all the way back. Okay, and that's a traditional way of measuring your arm length for tailors to give you the best length. Now, usually we're using this underarm measurement for the sweater, but sometimes, depending on how your sweater is constructed, you might need this measurement length. Another note, you're not going to need all of these measurements for every sweater that you ever do. You know, not every sweater requires these measurements, but they're good measurements to have to get the most custom fit, especially when you're using a framework like the 30-day sweater, where you can customize really every single aspect of the sweater to fit you perfectly. So if you were going to customize every section, you can also measure the bicep, right, around the top of the arm, so that you're making sure that the sleeve is going to fit nicely. You can also measure from the body to the elbow and from the elbow to the wrist. And those extra measurements will allow you to change the tapering on the sleeve to get a more close custom fit. And you're also going to want to have from the underarm, okay, and I would say you want it to be where the sleeve ends, not necessarily right underneath your armpit, because that's a really tight fit. So wherever you're maybe an inch and a half or two below your armpit to the hemline, okay. I forgot my numbering. We've got 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, and you're also going to want to do the hips. Okay, so the hip, if you're going to do some waist shaping so that you get kind of like that nice hourglass shape in the sweater, or even with men's sweater, so you'll see the nice big broad shoulders and it comes with a fitted hip. You want to have the hip measurement around the widest part of the hip, so that's going to be you know, around the butt. And then you'll also want to measure the waist. So this way you're going to get a nice right above the navel, at the smallest part of the waist, wherever your natural bend is. You'll use that number to incorporate some waist shaping into the sweater. And if you want to go for broke here, you can also get from the bust to the waist and from the waist to the hem. These will help you with that waist shaping, making sure that you're doing the decreases evenly for each section so that it looks natural. So that's pretty much it, guys. This is, you know, there's 14 measurements here. Again, you're not going to need all of these for every sweater that you work on, but especially using the 30-day sweater framework, all of these can be useful for getting that perfect custom fit. Now, remember, if you want to get the worksheet that I've created that outlines how to, all of these different measurements with instructions on what to do for each, go to 30daysweater.com/measure and download that today. Hopefully you guys found this useful, and I'll see you guys soon with some more sweater knitting tips.